Can you tell us more about Arunachala and Ramana Maharshi? Arunachala is a mountain in Tamil Nadu, southern India, which for millennia has been extolled as a spiritual navel of the planet. There is something magnetically attractive in the energy of this mountain, which has attracted sages who have become self-realized on its slopes over thousands and thousands of years. In the ancient scriptures, the mountain has been called the center of the world, the center of the spiritual world, and the Puranas give a story that Brahma and Vishnu were having an argument as who was the greatest of the gods between them, and Shiva turned himself into a column of fire and went through the earth and out into space, and a voice came from it saying, whoever can find the top or bottom of this column of fire will be the greatest guru. So Vishnu turns himself into a boar and tunnels down through the earth, comes out the other side, still can't find the bottom. So Brahma turns himself into a swan, some stories say a parrot, and flies up and up and up, and he never gets to the top. But he sees a flower falling down, so he grabs it in his beak and brings it down and says, I've been to the top, I picked this flower. And so Brahma is not considered a worthy god to worship. So there's only one temple, or maybe two in the whole of India, to Brahma. And it turns out Shiva coalesces into Arunachala mountain. And they have found that this mountain is older than the Himalayas. At one time, India was an island continent. And when Lemuria went down and there were tsunamis, and the whole continent moved up and hit the shelf which is now called Nepal, and all the mountains buckled and came up, and the Himalayas appeared in a great tectonic earth shift at one point. But Arunachala was there before the Himalayas, with the fossils on it show that it's perhaps the oldest mountain on the planet. And so there's something very special about that. And even when Ramana Maharshi was a young Brahmin boy, when he heard the word Arunachala, it did something in his consciousness, and he desired to go there, but he thought it was something like Shangri-La, some place that didn't exist. And he was a normal, rumbustious schoolboy, up to many pranks. He even urinated on statues of gods in the local temple, and stuff like that. And karmically, he got pissed on by a jealous sadhu when he was sitting meditating, and just didn't take any notice of it. But there was always a comeback for whatever you do. And he wasn't interested in his studies. He used to just stare at his work. And one day, he was in his uncle's house in Madurai, and he had a sudden fear that he was about to die. And he laid down on the floor, went into a kind of rigor mortis state, and suddenly realized that with the death of the body, I am not dead. And life rushed back into his system. And from that moment, he lost all sense of I-ness. He lost his sense of ego. He was always best in wrestling and fighting and cricket and swimming and what have you. After that, he wasn't interested in the games. He couldn't care less about anything like that. He couldn't care less about his lessons, even more so. And because he was not taking any notice of his lessons, he was given a homework to write out some English lesson 3 times by his teacher, and he just started, and then he went into a trance, just staring, and his elder brother said, with people like you, what's the use of study? You're insinuating you're a yogi. And he thought, yes, he's right. What is the use of this for somebody like me? And he quit his house. When his uncle came and said, oh, I just come from Arunachala, bang, suddenly it hit him that this was a real place. And something urged him to go to Arunachala. So he set off, just left a note saying, don't expend any effort in searching for this. He couldn't say I anymore. He said, I have gone in search of my father. And off he went, and it took him 3 days travel, and eventually arrived at the mountain. He went to the great Arunachala temple at the base of the mountain and threw his last coins into the water tank there. And you're supposed to have a bath before you go into the holy temple, but then it rained on him, so he said, right, I've had my bath. And he stayed in the temple precincts for days and weeks on end, and not eating unless somebody forced something into his mouth. And the local urchins thought, this is a pretentious 16-year-old boy pretending to be a monk or a sadhu. So they pelted him with rotten fruit and old garbage. So he went down underneath the temple, which was completely disgusting, dark, black hole, full of scorpions and other vermin. But he just went into samadhi and sat there cross-legged for weeks on end, and the grubs and other creatures burrowed into his legs, making tunnels in his legs, and he was totally oblivious. And it was only when one Shishadri Swami, another self-realized madman in Tiruvannamalai, saw urchins throwing stones down there. He went to investigate and found this Brahmin boy in samadhi. And so he had him brought out and looked after and fed, and all his legs were ripped because they were matted to the ground with his blood and pus that these insects had made. And he moved from one temple, small temple precinct, to another, until eventually he lived in a cave halfway up the mountain, Virupaksha cave, which was the cave of a previous self-realized master called Virupaksha, who, when he decided it was time for him to leave this plane, told his disciples to lock him in the room in the cave. They had to put a door on it. And after 2 days they came and they found just a pile of ash. He had self-disintegrated, and that pile of ash is still there, covered with a cloth. And Ramana Maharshi took that cave and lived in it for 16 years. And such was his silent radiance. He couldn't speak to anybody because he was so filled with this God awareness that he didn't want to talk. And his eyes were so radiant, and the energy coming off him was so peaceful that people came from all over the country just to sit in his radiance. And people who came full of problems just sat in his presence, and all their problems fell away. Their brain waves stilled, just like at the end of a mantra practice. And they were happy and went away afterwards with no problems. And he never studied anything, but all the great pundits, scholars, came to him and with all their questions about the Vedas and Vedanta and various scriptures, and he just gave the answers. The answers just came through because his lack of selfness allowed him to perceive perfectly what the meaning of all these obscure scriptures were. And it wasn't until the greatest Sanskrit scholar and great Sanskrit extempore poet called Kavyakanta Ganapati Muni came and pleaded with him he said, I have read everything that can be read. I have used all the mantras. I have known everything that can be known intellectually, but I still don't understand what is tapas. Tapas is translated as a spiritual heat, which means strong spiritual practice and understanding of the self. And for the first time in 16 years, he answered a question that was put to him, saying, if you look where the mantra is coming from and remain in that place, that is tapas. If you look at the place where I is coming from and remain there, that is tapas. And this was an enormous revelation to Ganapati. And he said, this is a Maharshi. From now on, he must be called Ramana Maharshi. And before that, he was just called Brahmana Swami because they didn't know what his name was. He never told anybody anything. And from then on, he began to answer questions